Not stolen. Not misplaced. Just quietly removed from every surface in my apartment while I was at work, like someone had walked through my life with surgical precision and extracted every proof that I existed as a person separate from them. I stood in my doorway that evening, heart hammering, eyes moving frantically across bare walls and empty shelves, and that's when my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We need to talk about the arrangement." I'd been hearing that phrase for 3 years. But this time, something underneath the words felt different. Wrong. Like a sentence spoken by someone wearing another person's face. I didn't know then what I know now. They hadn't been taking my money. They had been taking me. I work in payroll at a medical facility on the east side of the city. Numbers are my language. Order is my religion. My apartment reflects this with the quiet discipline of someone who learned early that chaos costs more than it gives. Soft lighting, clean counters, receipts filed by color in a drawer that sticks slightly when the humidity rises. Green for housing, yellow for utilities, blue for transportation, red for medical, purple for everything else. I am 31 years old, and I have been quietly financing my family's survival for 7 years. My name is Mave Whitlock, and for most of those 7 years I told myself this was normal. My mother, Linda, has a gift for making financial requests feel like expressions of love. She'll hand you a dish towel, sigh in that particular incomplete way of hers, and somehow within 4 minutes you've agreed to cover a lease renewal you didn't know existed. My father, Robert, approaches it differently with lectures about duty, blood, loyalty. His voice tightens at specific syllables when he wants money. I learned to read it the way you learn to read weather. My sister Nora is the storm itself. Younger by 3 years, louder by a lifetime. She calls me banker girl with that sharp smile of hers, the one that never quite reaches her eyes. New coat, new apartment, new crisis, always on rotation. I covered her security deposits twice. Her car payments 4 times. A medical bill she never explained. I told myself families have roles. Mine just happened to cast me as the foundation. But foundations don't feel things. And I had started to feel something I couldn't name. It began with small wrongnesses. The kind you dismiss once, twice, a dozen times before they accumulate into something you can no longer ignore. The first one happened on a Tuesday in October. I came home to find my spare key missing from the hook beside my door. I keep one there out of habit, a remnant from when I'd had a neighbor who watered my plants during work trips. I thought nothing of it initially. Keys fall. Keys get misplaced. But that same evening, I noticed my laptop had been moved. Not dramatically. Just slightly, the charging cable on the wrong side, the screen angle different from how I always leave it. The kind of shift that's designed to be deniable. I sat with that feeling for a long time before I filed it away under probably nothing. The second wrongness came 3 days later when Nora appeared at my parents' apartment wearing a coat I didn't recognize. Tagged. Someone had been timing her financial requests to her exact pay cycle for 7 years. That's not desperation. That's not family. That is precision. That is surveillance. And if they knew when her money arrived each month, what else did they know? What else had they been watching? Because what Mave was about to discover wasn't just that her family had mapped her finances. They had mapped her, and the map went far deeper than any bank account. I arrived at work the next morning running on 3 hours of fractured sleep and cold coffee, determined to absorb myself in numbers until the unease faded. Payroll is a language I trust. It doesn't reinterpret itself. It doesn't have ulterior motives. A column either balances or it doesn't. My office phone rang at 10:14 a.m. I answered with my work voice, clipped, professional, present. The voice on the other end was cheerful and unhurried. My parents' landlord, calling to confirm the renewal of an automatic deposit agreement. My deposit agreement. He thanked me for covering a late fee I had no knowledge of, and mentioned, with casual brightness, that my parents had provided him with my work email and my weekly schedule so he could reach me at a convenient time. I remember the sensation precisely. Heat beginning at the base of my neck and crawling upward. The cheap canvas art on the wall across from my desk going soft and blurred at the edges. They hadn't just used my money. They had opened a door directly into my professional life. Had handed out my schedule, my workplace schedule, to a third party without my knowledge or consent. As if the boundary between Mave who pays for everything and Mave who has a career didn't exist. As if I was not a person but an account, a resource with a login. I set the phone down without finishing the call, sat completely still for 11 minutes. Then I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists, and looked at my own face in the mirror for longer than was comfortable. I went directly to their apartment that evening. The hallway smelled of cleaning solution and old takeout. I sat them down, my parents on the sagging couch, Nora leaning in the doorway with her arms crossed, and spoke the sentence I had been swallowing for 7 years. I deserve to know what I'm paying for. What followed wasn't a fight. It never is with my family. Fighting requires acknowledgement that something is wrong. What they offered instead was that specific weaponized calmness, the kind designed to make you feel like the unstable one for raising your voice in a burning room. We feel attacked, my mother said. Take that tone with your coworkers, my father said. Nora laughed from the hallway. Should we tip you now or later? I left without finishing my sentence. Walked to my car. Drove 3 blocks, pulled over, and sat with my forehead against the steering wheel while the engine idled. Something was happening that I didn't have the right framework to understand yet. It felt like discovering a room in a house you've lived in for a decade, a room that has always been there, that you've been walking past every single day, but whose door you only now realized has been locked. That night I checked my email. There was a message from my building manager, not my parents' building manager, mine, asking to confirm a modification to my emergency contact information that had apparently been submitted 2 weeks prior. I had submitted nothing. The modification listed my mother, Linda, as my primary emergency contact and granted her secondary access rights to my lease communication. Someone had a copy of her key. Someone had been inside her apartment. And whoever posted that photograph knew exactly which drawer to frame in the shot, the drawer with 7 years of evidence. This wasn't opportunistic. This was targeted. This was someone who had studied her, learned her, and was now sending a message that was perfectly calibrated to one specific meaning. We know everything, and you can't prove any of it. What Mave didn't know yet was that the horror she was uncovering had a name, and that name was closer than she ever imagined. I called a locksmith at 11 p.m. and sat on my kitchen floor with a knife in my hand until he arrived. I am not a dramatic person. I want to be clear about that. I deal in order, in verifiable data, in columns that either balance or they don't. Sitting on a kitchen floor holding a chef's knife while waiting for a locksmith is not the behavior of the person I understand myself to be. But someone had been inside my apartment, and I no longer knew who. The locksmith changed all 3 locks and the deadbolt in under an hour. He was a quiet man in his 50s who didn't ask questions, and I was grateful for that in a way I couldn't have articulated. When he left, I checked every room, every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, the way you check when something that should feel safe has stopped feeling safe. I found nothing, but I found nothing the way you find nothing when you know you haven't checked the right place yet. Sleep came in pieces. Short, sharp fragments interrupted by sounds I couldn't source, the particular creak of the hallway outside my door, the ventilation system cycling in rhythms that suddenly seemed irregular. By 4 a.m., I had stopped trying. I made coffee and sat at the table and opened a new document on my laptop. I began writing everything down. Dates, events, amounts, the key, the tenant portal modification, the photograph, the scheduled timing of their financial requests mapped against my pay cycle, the landlord call, the work schedule. When I laid it out in sequence, the picture it formed was not the picture of a financially dependent family making poor decisions. It was the picture of a coordinated system, and systems require architects. My Uncle Grant called at 7:30 a.m. He runs a small moving company across the city, quiet, observant, the only member of my family who had never asked me for anything. He said he was at my parents' apartment. They'd asked him to help pack. Pack what? Everything, he said. Clothes, dishes, photographs. He paused. Then carefully, I'll make sure anything with your name on it gets returned. I stayed very still after I hung up, because Grant's phrasing anything with your name on it carried a weight that the sentence shouldn't have had. It implied there were things there bearing my name. More things than I knew about. He arrived at my apartment that evening with 3 sealed boxes. Inside, an unopened blender still in its packaging, kitchen towels with tags attached. In the complete darkness of her own apartment, with her locks changed and every entry point secured, someone opened a drawer that only she knew how to open quietly. That's not a burglar. That's not a stranger. That is someone who has spent time inside her space, enough time to learn its rhythms, its resistance points, its specific geography of sound. Mave was about to learn that the horror wasn't happening to her from the outside. It had been growing on the inside for years, and the person at the center of it wasn't who she expected. I spoke into the darkness. I changed the locks. Silence. And then a voice I recognized immediately, the specific cadence of it. The careful articulation answered from somewhere near my kitchen. "I know," Nora said. "I was here when the locksmith came." The lights returned as suddenly as they'd left a breaker, deliberately tripped and reset. I understood that immediately, and I saw my sister standing near my kitchen counter, my color-coded drawer open in front of her, a folder of documents in her hand that I had never seen before. She looked completely calm. That was the most frightening part. Not that she was there, not the violation of it, not even the darkness in the drawer and the deliberate staging of the entire encounter. It was her absolute stillness. She stood in my kitchen holding documents bearing my name with the composure of someone who has rehearsed this scene many times. "You were going to figure it out eventually," she said. "I told them that. I told them you were too organized not to. What is in that folder?" She set it on the counter and pushed it toward me. I crossed the room and opened it. Inside were loan applications, credit accounts, a secondary savings account I had never opened at a bank I had never used, all bearing my signature or something close enough to my signature that the distinction would require expert analysis to establish. Alongside these, printed email correspondence between Nora and various financial institutions, referencing me as a co-applicant who had confirmed participation by verbal authorization. The total liability spread across those documents was significant. Significant enough that my legs felt uncertain beneath me. "How long?" I said. "For years," she said. Simply, as if answering a question about the weather. "And Mom and Dad?" She tilted her head slightly. "They didn't know all of it. They knew some of it. They knew enough to stay quiet." "The photograph in the group chat. That was a warning," she said. "You weren't supposed to look at the receipts that closely." I thought about the pattern I'd noticed. The scheduled timing of every financial request mapped to my pay cycle. "You tracked my deposits. You made it easy," she said. "Same schedule every month, same accounts, same habits. You're very consistent, Mave. It's one of the things that made this work as long as it did. I have spent years dealing in the language of numbers." In that moment, standing in my own kitchen with a folder of fraudulent documents in my hands, I tried very hard to stay in that language. To remain precise. Because the alternative, the full emotional weight of what I was understanding, felt like something I might not be able to surface from. "The group chat message," I said. "We need distance from you. That was supposed to make you emotional," she said. "Emotional people don't audit their receipts." Nora had orchestrated everything: the loans, the credit lines, the storage unit, the therapy breach, with 4 years of patient, meticulous precision. But someone had just sent Mave information that Nora didn't have. Someone who knew about Unit 14 on Harrow Street. Someone who had been watching this entire situation from the outside, waiting. And if that someone wasn't family and wasn't law enforcement, then the question that should have stopped Mave cold before she ever got in that car was this: why would a stranger want her there alone at night in a storage facility no one else knew existed? I drove to Harrow Street alone. I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware that every rational instinct should have redirected me to a phone call with the police, to Elias, to anyone other than a solo drive at 10 p.m. to an address texted by an unknown number. But I want to explain what it feels like to discover that every private space in your life has been accessed without your knowledge: your home, your finances, your medical records, your professional life, your very name. Because what it feels like is not fear. Not initially. Feels like weightlessness. Like the ropes you didn't know were holding you down have all been cut simultaneously. And weightlessness, in that first disorienting moment, feels almost exactly like freedom. So I drove. Harrow Street Storage was a long, low building at the edge of an industrial district, its exterior lit by amber security lights that turned everything the color of old photographs. Unit 14 was near the far end of the east corridor. The combination padlock had a code I somehow knew: my childhood address, a number Nora had always defaulted to for passwords because she was, beneath all the careful architecture of her manipulation, still predictable in the ways that mattered. The door rolled up on the first pull. The light inside flickered twice before holding. 31 boxes, floor to ceiling, exactly as she'd said. stacked with a neatness that was almost domestic. Each one labeled in a handwriting that was close enough to mine to be disorienting, close enough that I had to look twice to confirm it wasn't. My name on every box. My name on the storage rental agreement taped to the wall beside the door, with my signature, my driver's license number, my cell phone. I stood in the center of it and felt something I hadn't anticipated. Not rage. Not grief. Something colder and more clarifying than either. I started photographing everything. Methodically, starting with the rental agreement, working through each labeled box, the stacked documents visible through open lids, the items inside. I sent the photographs to my own email as I shot them. Then I forwarded them with a clear subject line and a one-paragraph explanation to my building's legal department, to my workplace HR, to the fraud division of 3 financial institutions, and to one detective I'd looked up 2 days earlier after changing my locks, a name I'd found through a colleague who'd once navigated something similar. I had just pressed send for the final time when I heard footsteps at the entrance of the storage corridor. Not Nora. I recognized the gait before I saw the face. Uncle Grant. He stopped in the entrance to Unit 14 and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not calm. Not quiet. Something older and more complicated than either. You got the message, he said. That was you. He nodded slowly. Why didn't you just tell me directly? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I needed to know if you'd come alone. If you came alone, you were ready. If you called the police first, I would have known you needed more time. He looked around at the boxes, and we would have lost this. I studied him. This man who had never asked